Chapter 2. In Chapter 1, remember, we meet Anastasia, who's a 12-year-old girl, says she's not good at anything, and they live in the city. Now, her father and her mother are telling her she has to move to the suburbs. The suburbs is like an area where all the houses look the same, where Anastasia thinks everyone's boring and all they do is watch TV all day and they don't read books. So she's not happy. Remember, she has a younger brother, a 2.5-year-old baby brother called Sam. Chapter 2. Daddy, asked Anastasia as she stood in the bathroom door that evening, watching her father give Sam a bath. Have you and Mom ever given serious thought to what a weird baby Sam is? It was true what she said. Right now, for example, Sam was sitting in the bathtub, and he looked like any normal, ordinary 2.5-year-old baby. He had a fat stomach. With a poking out belly button, rosy cheeks, curly brown hair, brown eyes with long eyelashes, and he had soap suds in his ears, which was kind of cute. A minute ago he squirmed and wiggled and cried and screeched when his father had washed his face, which was an ordinary 2.5-year-old baby thing to do. But then he had said firmly and with dignity, "Don't get soap in my eyes, please. My eyes are very sensitive." That was weird. The little boy next door could only say things like Mama, Dada, Bye-bye, and ordinary baby things. Sam never said Mama or Dada or Bye-bye. He had started talking like Walter Cronkite before he was a year old. Anastasia's mother swore that one day when he was a 4-month-old boy, he had said, "Thank you," when she fed him some strained apricots and fruit, but no one believed her, and she had no witnesses. "He's not weird," said Anastasia's father, lifting Sam out of the tub. "It's just that people develop at different rates. They grow. For example, Anastasia, you are 12 years old, but you are already 5 feet 7 inches, a little bit shorter than Mr. Nick." "I know that, Daddy. You don't really need to remind me of that, Daddy. I only bring it up because it is an unusual height for a 12-year-old girl. You've grown fast, height-wise, but at the same time your body is still quite straight up and down. I mean, you haven't begun to mature much physically, except for height. You don't have hips, for example, or... Daddy, don't be gross. There's nothing gross about hips. I was just pointing out that different aspects and things of people develop and grow at different times and rates. Now, in many ways, Sam is still a baby." "Cut that out, Sam." Sam was eating toothpaste. "I like it," said Sam. "I like the flavor." "Well, it cost $1.59 in a tube. Cut it out." He began to dry Sam with a big blue towel. "See what I mean, Anastasia? He's mischievous, gets into trouble, like all toddlers. And he still wears diapers because he hasn't achieved the physical maturity to be toilet trained, go to the toilet by himself. I wish you would be toilet trained, Sam." "No," said Sam and smiled sweetly. "And he still has his security blanket, like many babies." "Where is my blankie?" asked Sam. "I want it right now." "Mom washed it while you were having your bath," said Anastasia. "It's in the dryer." "Well, I want it when I go to bed," said Sam firmly. Dr. Krupnik pinned on Sam's diapers and snapped up his pajamas. "There you go, old buddy. Go find your mum." Sam paddled off and walked down the hall. "It's just that he is verbally precocious," said Anastasia's father, leaning over to scrub out the tub. "He's unusual and different in that way. But I wouldn't call him... What did you call him? A weird baby?" "Well, okay then. He's unusual. He's different. Don't you and Mum realize what a disaster it would be to move an unusual baby like Sam to the suburbs? In the suburbs, all babies are the same, are alike." "You're sure of that?" "Absolutely. All suburban babies ride around in shopping carts at supermarkets and cry, and their mothers slap them." "Their mothers slap them?" "Absolutely. Their mothers all have pink curlers in their hair. Do you want that to happen to Mum and to Sam?" Dr. Krupnik sighed. "Anastasia, get me a beer from the refrigerator. As soon as your mom puts Sam to bed, we will talk more about this move, which we are going to make." Did I hear the last part of the sentence correctly? "Which we are going to make." You once told me that this family was a democracy, that we could vote. Wrong. I said that this family is a benevolent dictatorship where one person makes the rules. Don't I get any part in that decision making? Is this a fascist state? Not at all. You get a part. What part? You're going to help us choose a house. They sat around the table in the living room, which had once been the dining room table until the dining room had become Sam's bedroom. It was certainly true, Anastasia thought again, that the apartment was getting too small. Or maybe they were getting too big. Certainly she was getting too big. 5'7" for Pete's sake, so like 1 meter 75. Probably the Celtics would be scouting her for the basketball team before she was 15. At this rate, she would be almost 7 feet tall by then. Already no boys liked her because she was taller than they were. When she was 7 feet tall, it would be even worse. Not that she wanted boys to like her. Anastasia hated all boys, especially all the boys in the 6th grade of the Bolsa Elementary School, and most especially Robert Giannani, who carried a briefcase to school every day. She wondered what Robert Giannani did with his briefcase now that school was over for the summer. Maybe they would be more interesting boys in junior high in the fall. Not that she cared, of course. And by fall, they might be living in the suburbs. She could feel the thought of it affecting her physically. The stomachache was coming back. She could feel her hair beginning to ooze oil, so she would have to wash it again before she went to bed. And she had already washed it in the morning. She could feel a pimple, some acne, beginning to grow on her chin. Her eyes behind her glasses began to blur. Terrific. Now she was going blind on top of everything else. Blind is when you can't see. Anastasia pictured herself in the suburbs, 7 feet tall, with acne and greasy hair and blind. She would get a seeing eye dog to help her see, a ferocious one, and name him Fan. If any boys ever made any mean comments to her, remarks about her height, she would simply say in a low voice to her dog, "Kill." That wasn't a bad thought. It made her smile to herself. She pictured her seeing dog tearing Robert Giannani's briefcase to shreds with his teeth and then starting in on Robert Giannani himself. She grinned and smiled. Her vision became back. "So," said her father, taking out a notebook, "what we need to do is make a list." Anastasia groaned. "Aww." Even her mother groaned. Dr. Krupnik was always making lists. That's her father, by the way. Once, when Anastasia was younger, she had been a list maker too, but then her life became too complicated. "House," wrote Dr. Krupnik at the top of the page. "Okay," he said. "So let's decide the kind of things we want to look for in a house. Catherine, what's most important to you?" Her mother thought for a moment, chewing on a strand of her long hair. Her hair was always shiny like a TV commercial for shampoo. She didn't even wash it every day. She told Anastasia that when she was a teenager, she had had oily hair. But Anastasia didn't believe her. Parents always tell you stuff like that to make you feel better, and when they do, it makes you feel worse. "Light," said her mother finally. "Good light, and a room all to myself where I can paint." That made sense. Anastasia had been afraid for a moment that her mother would say, "Coppertone appliances in the kitchen." Anybody who had a kitchen full of Coppertone appliances, so a certain type of thing made out of the material, would very soon start wearing big pink curlers and worrying about wax buildup. But light, good light, and a room where she could paint made sense. Anastasia's mother was a very good painter. Long ago, before she was married, she had studied art in New York. Even now, some of her paintings hung in galleries in Boston and Cambridge. But her easel and paintings were in the tiny room that had once been a pantry, where they do their laundry and wash their clothes. She never complained about that, but it made Anastasia feel a little sad for her. "Light," wrote Dr. Krupnik on the page. "Room for painting," he wrote. "Anastasia," he asked, "what is most important to you?" She was thinking. Now that her vision had unblurred and she could see, and now that she wasn't going blind, she wouldn't need the seeing eye dog. Probably there was a law against having a seeing eye dog if you could see. Still, she still liked the idea of a monstrous dog,
Excuse me.
straining at the end of the leash to whom she could whisper, "Kill," if someone like Robert Giannani started making bad comments about her being tall. "You go next, Dad," said Anastasia. "I'm still thinking." "Study," he wrote next. "Bookcases," he wrote beside it. Well, that made sense too. Dr. Krupnik was a professor of English. He also wrote poetry, and each time he had written enough poems to make a book, he sent them off to his publisher, and then a new book was published with his name on it. His picture was on the back of each of his books. Anastasia could never figure out why people didn't recognize him on the streets and rush up and ask for his autograph. But they didn't. He said he didn't mind. In fact, he said he was glad and happy that people didn't do that. People wrote to him, though. Strangers wrote to him, people who had read his books of poetry. Once, a year ago, Anastasia had gotten into a lot of trouble because of those letters. One night at dinner, when Sam was a much younger baby who kept them awake all night because he cried and screamed a lot, so they were always feeling tired, Dr. Krupnik had said, "There is a stack of mail on my desk that is giving me a grey hair." "Dad," Anastasia had pointed out, "you don't have any hair." That was true. The top of his head was quite bald, with no hair. "Well, my beard is getting grey from the mail. When am I ever going to find time to answer it? I have to correct 300 exams, and the publisher wants revisions on the new book." "Oh, don't worry," said her mother. "You'll get into it sometime. Those people don't expect answers anyway." He just groaned and stroked his beard. Anastasia had thought about that. She liked to write letters, and she had never anyone to write to, because no one ever wrote to her. So the next day, using her father's portable typewriter, she had answered all of the letters. It was fun. To the man in Des Moines, who had sent 3 poems asking Dr. Krupnik to read them and give his opinion, Anastasia wrote this. "Dear Mr. Covington, I read all of your nice poems. They are very nice. They are not as good as mine, but that is because I have worked a long time at it, and I am quite famous. Maybe if you work at it some more, yours will be better in the future. I certainly do hope so." A girl had written a very strange and peculiar letter from San Francisco. The letter said that Myron Krupnik's love poems had really spoken to where she was at, and she thought that they had kindred souls, and she would like to spend some time with him if he was ever in San Francisco. So someone writing a love poem to her father. Anastasia answered her, "Dear Lisa, I am a married man with 2 adorable children, and I never go to San Francisco. But thank you anyway." A librarian in Detroit had written Dr. Krupnik's new book was very popular in her library. It was amazing. She wrote how often people checked it out, took out the book. Anastasia answered the librarian, "I don't think it is amazing at all. It is, after all, one of the finest collections of poetry published in the 20th century. I wish you would suggest to them, though, that they buy the book. I don't make any money when they take it out of the library. If they buy it, I make 10%. There had been 12 letters, and Anastasia had answered all of them, and she had mailed her answers. When she told her father that night what she had done, she had planned to suggest that he might pay her a secretarial salary to give her some money for it. It had taken her all day to write the letters. Even at minimum wage, it would be a good chunk of money for her savings account. Instead, he had gone storming out of the house to the post office to try to get the letters back. The post wouldn't even let him in, even though they were closed, but they wouldn't give him the letters. They told him that tampering with the mails was illegal, a federal offense. So he came home and drank 2 beers very fast, without offering Anastasia the phone, without even speaking to Anastasia, for that matter. And then he stayed up until 2 a.m. writing letters to all the same people that Anastasia had written to. Anastasia had not figured out why her father was so upset until a few weeks later, when it became very clear. Robert Giannani had slipped her a note in school that said, "I like you. Do you like me? Tick or check 1, yes or no. A whole lot. I hate you. I don't know." She had checked and chosen "I hate you" immediately. Then she had decided that that was mean. So she erased her first check mark and simply put no underneath. Underneath, she had written sorry. But she had thought suddenly while she was answering it about her father, how her father might have answered if he had tried to do it for her. Her father didn't believe in what he called terse negatives. That meant that he didn't like just a no. He probably would have written something long and boring, beginning, "Dear Robert, you are in many ways a good and fine person, but at this particular time..." Thinking about it, she began to realize that people just can't answer other people's mails. Her parents were looking at her, and she realized that she had been daydreaming again, thinking about stuff. And not even about the right thing. Not about the new house. What a horrible thought. A new house. Even thinking about Robert Giannani was better than thinking about a new house. What would happen, she asked slowly, if we made this list about what we want in a house, and then we couldn't find a house that had those things? "Well," said her father, "I suppose we'd have to give up and stay here. But I think we can probably find what we want. Look, we've put down a room for your mum to paint in with lots of light, and a study for me with bookcases. While your mind was drifting there, off in space somewhere, we added a yard, a back garden, for Sam. Can't you think of anything that you want, Anastasia?" "Yes," said Anastasia, realizing suddenly that she had solved everything. That they would not have to leave the apartment, not to have to live in the suburbs at all. "A tower. I want a house where I can have a room in a tower. In a torre." To her surprise, her father wrote that down. "The Mystery of the Girl Who Lived in a Tower," Anastasia wrote dreamily. Then she looked at the title. Good grief, it sounded like a Nancy Drew title. Probably on the library shelf of 12,000 Nancy Drew books. There was already one called The Mystery of the Tower Room, or something. She tore that page out of her notebook and threw it away. It was much harder to write a book than she had ever realized it would be. So that's the end of chapter 2, where Anastasia's talking to her parents about how weird her baby brother is, because her baby brother can speak. And usually young children don't do that. And they're talking about things they want in the house and how much she hates Robert Giannani. That's the end of chapter 2.